Mr. Chairman, and welcome panel. My first question is for Mr. Powell and Ms. Sequaptua. Did I get it right? I'm so sorry.
Yes, you did, Sequaptua.
Okay, well, I'm from Wyoming, and as you know, Wyoming and the West face unique challenges that can impact the availability of broadband services and probably create additional costs. You know, sometimes our equipment is in remote areas when it needs to be repaired, hard to get maintenance to that kind of equipment in some of our areas, and that can cause additional costs, or service goes down. So what costs disproportionately impact rural and tribal areas when it comes to deploying broadband services? What are you seeing out there?
For the tribal areas, you're absolutely correct with the rugged nature. If you look at the state of New Mexico on Highway 40, goes into Arizona, and about 60, maybe 90 miles from that border, it's lava. So constructing in that requires advanced equipment that's more expensive, and I think that's probably one of the biggest elements that we battle when we put in our when we design our projects. The permitting is also a challenge. I will say, though, that with the recent federal efforts with the Permitting Council, there's more of a mechanism to coordinate the federal agency permits, and that's going to be a huge time savings, which also can have cost components as well. But we look forward to working with these new initiatives that have made broadband projects eligible for this project or for their Permitting Council's process, and are optimistic that we can reach our delivery goals for our tribal broadband connectivity project, whose time frame had to be extended by was allowed to be extended up to 4 years, as opposed to the initial NOFA, which had a 1-year project. Now, for our project costs there, we're going to look at some administrative costs that were unexpected for that longer time frame, and that has a lot to do with the supply chain issues, wherein I just ordered, a couple million feet of fiber with a 2-year delivery date.
Is permitting more difficult in Indian country?
It is. We also have the Bureau of Indian Affairs that we need to work with. So that can be, that is another process that we just have to factor in. So when we look at, reforms and coordinations, the BIA did sign an MOU to work on these projects, but it's time and education also within the agencies. You might have that conversation at the federal level, and we've heard some of the witnesses speak to that, but then once the management down to the people processing and receiving paperwork, until they're trained and they're meeting their time frames, we're going to continue to see barriers.
Is it necessary to have BIA involved in this? Is this an area where BIA could be more of an impediment than a help?
Yes and no. I think that BIA does play an important role here. Not all tribes are the same. We're sovereign nations. Some of us have more resources and more internal capabilities and capacity. And for those tribes that can move forward, a lighter touch with the BIA is absolutely fair.
And does the BIA adapt itself to the differences among tribes and their self-governance capabilities?
Yes, they do. They try to do that. The BIA also has a role, though, I think, for the least resource tribes. For instance, with spectrum acquisition, this is something where tribes have not had access to sovereign rights over what could be considered a natural resource like water. So now as we move forward into the telecommunication space and we're trying to negotiate in the secondary markets, perhaps there's a band of spectrum that we would like to utilize, and we know that it's not being utilized by the license holder. There was an order to the effect to allow tribes the opportunity to utilize that underused spectrum, but where does a tribe begin, especially if it's a low resource tribe? How do we engage in those processes? We're not going to be able to without additional structures of support, and BIA has the opportunity to grow and help us with that process.
Okay, well, I hope you'll reach out to the committee because you're knowledgeable in this area, and let us know if there are areas where we should require a lighter touch of the BIA with regard to regulation and layers of bureaucracy in this area that might prevent a company from accessing a broadband project in Indian country. Mr. Powell, same question for you, maybe a little less focused on tribal lands.
Yeah, I think states like yours are the most challenging. Number one, for geography. These are complex terrains to wire and connect, and those are unique challenges. Permitting, as you mentioned, pole access, as we've discussed, all are significant problems we're running into those communities. The availability of skilled labor to work often in remote regions is challenging as well. And then I think an area we haven't talked enough about across the whole country is this continuing backup in the supply chain, which is really becoming quite problematic, I think, for all of us.
Mr. Spalter, quick question about developing a location fabric. What are some of the difficulties you faced? We've covered some of them here today. Are there any we haven't discussed that the committee should be aware of? And then for the entire panel, how can the FCC best ensure that the broadband maps, which will be used to allocate BEAD funding, are accurate? So again, with my thanks to the panel.
Recognizing the unfortunate history of previous broadband maps, U.S. Telecom endeavored to undertake a pilot program to actually evolve and deploy on a pilot basis location fabrics, both in Missouri and Virginia. We found that we can do so if we were aggressively seeking the types of data that need to contribute to more refined mapping processes, including not only open source data sets, but also proprietary data sets, geocoding and other sophisticated data analyses that can actually inform the maps. We presented those pilots and the underlying location fabric to the FCC and are very glad that they've adopted that as the framework for the existing maps. We absolutely have an opportunity we hope, in a short time so that we can deploy dollars by the end of June to have a refined, accurate, and deeply granular set of maps because of things like the location coding, the location fabrics geocoding mechanisms that allow each structure to be identified in serviceable communities. So we will more accurately know where broadband is, but more importantly, where it isn't. And so we're confident and I would even say optimistic that the maps will actually be able to iterate to a place where we can have confidence in them as long as we continue collectively, not only as industry, but with our community partners and the states to work towards ensuring that the challenge process can move nimbly, quickly, and effectively.
Thank you. And would anyone else care to weigh in on my broader question? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I think speaking to the goal of utilizing the map to close the digital divide speaks to not just the accuracy of what's on the map itself right now, but how we use the map and how we design it as a tool. You know, I think that we have different, for instance, I'm speaking from education. You know, our schools and those anchor institutions, how are they being categorized on the map? How are other anchor institutions for health centers, for instance, how are they being characterized on the map? Because the map isn't just for baseline data, but it's also a planning tool. So the more dynamic it is, the more the anchor institutions are included, then we can design different broadband strategies that include the different sectors. And I think that that's what's going to help us realize America's broadband needs.
Can I add that most communities are not conducting the kind of challenging process, education process that Kimball is? So if we had more communities able to conduct that process, not only are they fixing the map, they're learning about broadband while they're there.
Great panel. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.